Hello and welcome to Summarize. I'm Roshan Mohammed Salih. Israel champions itself as the only democracy in the Middle East and claims to treat all of its citizens equally and fairly. Of course, Palestinians have long disputed that claim, and as recent news reports illustrate, even fellow Jews from Ethiopia are now protesting against the regime's brutality and racism. 135,000 Ethiopian Jews live in Israel, and they've long complained about unfair treatment and police violence. There have also been some disturbing reports of Israeli attempts to sterilize Ethiopian women to decrease their numbers, and over 40% of Ethiopian men serving in the Israeli army have been sent to military prisons during their service. On today's show, we'll be shedding the spotlight on Israel's internal racism towards fellow Jews, as well as other minorities seen as outsiders by a mostly European Zionist elite. But first, here's a report on Israeli racism by Mona Kandil in the West Bank.
Ethiopian Jews in Israel held several rallies against Israeli police brutality and racism last month. The Ethiopian Jewish community has been outraged after a video emerged showing Israeli police officers assaulting and brutally beating an Israeli soldier of Ethiopian origin. The Jewish Ethiopians, who are a minority in Israel, are not the only community being discriminated. Palestinians who are still living in the lands occupied in 1948 and make up 20% of Israel's population are effectively second-class citizens and continue to suffer under Israel's discriminatory policies.
We have warned in the past that Israel's discriminatory policy against us, the Arabs, will be adopted against minorities in Israel like the Jews of Ethiopian origin. There's an official Israeli policy of racism against the Arabs living in the areas occupied in 1948. This policy is not new. It started with the Nakba catastrophe. Discrimination is seen in all aspects of life.
Observers say that racism and violence have been at the core of Tel Aviv's policies and culture, which are based on larger colonial and settler projects. The Palestinians have long complained of racism, which is already a reality on the street, in both law and at the heart of the political system, where they are denied their basic rights.
It's a racist community in Israel, not only on the official level, but in the street. Demonstrations will always go on against the Israeli discriminatory measures. However, I don't expect major change in the policies of the current Israeli regime, because, unfortunately, this one is the most extremist in the history of Israel.
The Israeli measures against the Palestinians aim at forcing us to leave our land. It's apartheid in all aspects of life. The Israeli regime continues to approve illegal discriminatory laws that are only applied to the Palestinians.
In addition, millions of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank face systematic aggression, including home demolitions, under the pretext of a lack of building licenses. Palestinians are arrested on a daily basis and imprisoned without charge or trial. They are denied the freedom of movement as well as freedom of speech, and any of them could be murdered by Israeli soldiers for taking part in popular protests. Without serious opposition and pressure from the so-called international community, Tel Aviv will continue its discriminatory policies towards Arab and African communities, especially while Israel sees itself as an entity above the law, protected by its ally in Washington. For the Sunrise, this is Mona Kandil, occupied Ramallah.
To discuss Israeli racism, we have two guests in the studio with us today. Gilad Atzmon is an ex-Israeli who's now a fierce critic of the Zionist state. He's also a famous British jazz artist and author who writes on political matters, social issues, and Jewish identity and culture. And Frank Gelly is an Anglican priest and cultural critic and commentator. He was formerly a journalist in Italy and England. Thank you very much for coming in today, both of you guys. Gilad, if I can start with you. So help us to understand this. Why is Israeli society so racist towards a fellow Jewish group?
It is quite simple. Israel is a multi-layered society. It's a very hierarchic society, and it is the level of whiteness that would determine your status within society. At the very top, we find the East European Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, not even the Western European Jews. We are really talking about East European. And then we find the what they called pure Sephardi's, which are
Arab Jews.
They are basically Arab Jews who lived in Palestine before Zionism.
So they come next.
And they come next. And then we see the Iraqi Jews, the Moroccan Jews, different level of different type of Arab Jews. The Palestinians, as we learned in the report, are second-class citizens. In fact, they are not second-class citizens. There are 8 or 9. There are many groups of Jews who are coming ahead of them, ahead of the Palestinians, and they come as something seven.
You're saying that the Ethiopian Jews are classed even below the Palestinians,
and this is a very big question. You know, where are who is, and then at the bottom, at the very bottom, you have all those new immigrants, the Israeli call them infiltrators. People have illegal immigration from Africa and so on and so on. So it's a very multi-layered society defined by a very hierarchic, basically white supremacist all the way through. Now, it is very clear that Arab Jews, and it is easy to explain sociologically, Arab Jews are actually very offensive towards Palestinians, in spite of the fact that they are themselves Arab. They listen to Kulthum, because they want to differentiate themselves from the Palestinians and to identify with the white class upper.
Well, I guess Zionism is originally a Western ideology, isn't it? So maybe it's not all that surprising that there is this element of white supremacy within Israeli society itself. Frank, what do you make of all this?
It's interesting that the Ethiopian Jews actually were celebrated as a great success story by the State of Israel when they were lifted from Sudan, actually, where they'd gone to escape the civil war in Ethiopia, into Israel, and it was supposed to be the promised land. But in fact, it turned out to be less than the promised land, and now they find themselves discriminated against and treated in abysmal ways. I mean, even their blood donors, so they discovered that blood donated by Ethiopian Jews was actually destroyed, which caused great offense. And
these are guys that serve in the Israeli army as well.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you could say Palestinians, they might not actually want Israel to exist, but these guys actually, they're rooting for Israel. They're
Indeed.
Still...
And the Ethiopians are quite a warlike people. So they belong to a minority, the Falasha minority, but they actually share in the national ethos of the Ethiopians, so great fighters. So, I mean, obviously, the sad thing is that they were discriminated against back in Ethiopia, and now they're acting in the Israeli army the role of, not a very pleasant role towards the Palestinians.
Okay, all right, we're going to pick this discussion up in a few minutes' time, but we're going to go to a report now. We've been casting our eye on some of the latest events in Palestine, and we've also been tracking the social media response to them. So here's Camelia Shambayati with a roundup.
Hi, and welcome to our social media roundup. Now, the question of whether Black Lives Matter in Israel has been a controversial topic. Let's check out a few Facebook comments. Noel from the US says, "Of course they don't. Israel is a racist entity by design. Look at how they segregate and treat Palestinians. Can't say I'm at all surprised they have problems of racism among their own." Interesting parallel there. And Shiho from Japan simply says, "Do Black Lives Matter anywhere?" And if we look at one more comment, Jean from the US says, "The truth is, Israel is an apartheid nation against its own people and to the Palestinians. Israel has a long history of discriminating against Jews who are not of Eastern European descent." Moving on now, a shocking video has surfaced of Israeli soldiers beating a Palestinian man in a protest against illegal settlements in the Palestinian refugee camp of Jalazon. He managed to stand his ground for a considerable amount of time until it took several soldiers to arrest him, after which they still continued to beat him. And finally, a video produced by the Israeli regime's Foreign Affairs Department has backfired. The anti-Hamas video depicts journalists covering Israel's brutal assault on Gaza last summer as naive and uninformed. The video has been branded bizarre, misleading, and poorly conceived by the Foreign Press Association, with even Western media outlets blasting the video. And that's all the social media news I have for you this time. Please do check out our social media pages, either on Twitter or Facebook, to keep up with the latest on the show.
So I just want to ask you a few more questions about the Ethiopian Jews, and then perhaps we can widen this discussion out to other minorities that Israel kind of discriminates against. Gilad, I just want to understand from my own, kind of erudition, are they accepted? Are the Falasha Ethiopian Jews accepted as Jews by mainstream Israeli society?
This is a very difficult question. They are definitely accepted enough to die for Israel in Gaza. Apparently, their blood is not accepted. The women are sterilized, which is devastating, and you ask yourself why. And again, when we come to these questions, the first question that I ask myself is, how is it possible that a state that defines itself as a Jewish state behave in such a manner towards people, to people who are supposed to be Jews?
But they were brought to Israel originally. Am I wrong in saying it wasn't a gesture of solidarity